Everyone has a childhood memory that doesn't quite fit with the rest. Something is slightly off and you can't quite reconcile it. Mine is about the day I appeared on the show Barney and Friends. You remember Barney, right? The purple dinosaur who sang about love and taught kids to be kind? Yeah, that's the one I thought I knew too. But what I saw that day in 1994 has haunted me for nearly 30 years. I was 6 years old when my mother received a call that I'd be selected from a regional casting agency to be on the show. We lived in Irving, Texas, not far from where they filmed it at the studios in Las Colinas. My kindergarten teacher had submitted my name after a talent show where I sang The Old Man without forgetting a single number. Not exactly Broadway material, but apparently good enough for a children's show. Mom was ecstatic. In the early 90s, Barney was at the height of his popularity. Every kid I knew watched the show. The prospect of appearing alongside the purple dinosaur was like being told you were going to be meeting Santa Claus and the Easter Bunny simultaneously while eating unlimited ice cream. It was beyond comprehension. The night before filming, I couldn't sleep. I imagined myself singing the I Love You song with Barney, playing games with the other kids, and becoming a minor celebrity at school. Mom had even promised to record it on our VCR so I could watch it for myself whenever I wanted. The production assistant who greeted us was a thin woman named Marjorie, with brown hair pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She wore a headset and carried a clipboard, checking off our names as we entered. Parents would be separated from children during the filming. The adults would wait in a designated area while we kids would be in the green room until called for rehearsal. A standard procedure for television productions involving children, they assured everyone. I remember my mother kneeling down, straightening my carefully chosen outfit, a blue polo shirt and khaki shorts, and giving me a kiss on the forehead. Marjorie led us kids, there were 8 of us in total, down a series of hallways. The studio was larger than it appeared from the outside, with corridors branching off in ways that didn't make architectural sense. We passed doors labeling props, costumes, and set design before arriving at the green room. There were coloring books, toys, and a TV playing cartoons. We were instructed to stay in the room unless escorted by a staff member. Rehearsal would begin in about an hour. I tried to focus on the coloring books, but I was too excited. I wanted to see the set, to catch a glimpse of Barney before the show. The other kids seemed content with the activities, but I kept glancing at the door. After 30 minutes, when no adult was watching, I slipped out. The hallway was quiet. I decided to try to find the main set, thinking I could peek at it and then return before anyone noticed I was gone. I retraced my steps, but quickly became lost in the labyrinthian corridors. The studio seemed larger from the inside, with doors that led to more hallways than I could imagine. I turned a corner and saw a room across the hall, with the door slightly ajar. I heard voices from inside, and my curiosity pushed me forward. I crept toward the door and peered through the crack. Inside was a conference room, with a long table surrounded by men and women in expensive-looking business attire. They had to be in their 60s or 70s, all with that polished look of wealth and influence. At the head of the table stood a man with a shock of white hair and piercing blue eyes that somehow seemed too bright. Their words drifted towards me in fragments. An older woman with a pearl necklace nodded as they discussed children's theta waves, providing an excellent conduit. Their innocence makes the barrier so thin you can nearly poke a hole through it, she said. A chuckle echoed after she spoke. She then whispered a name that made my skin crawl. Malgathus. A man with a mustache and a red tie pulled out a covered cage. He then lifted off a sheet, revealing a white bird inside. The group gathered around the cage. From my angle, I couldn't see what they were doing, but their faces changed as they watched with grotesque excitement. The mustached man smiled. He then opened the cage door, and all I could hear was the bird, screaming and shaking. And then silence. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure they would hear it. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I knew enough to know I should be scared. And scared I definitely was. I backed away from the door, trying to process what I'd just witnessed. The rest of the show went fairly normally after that. In fact, I don't really have much memory of it at all. After it was over, I went back home, and all the things I thought would come from being on TV did happen for a while. However, the memory of that weird group of business people never quite got out of my mind. My mom had recorded the episode, of course, and I remember about 6 months later, I actually sat down to watch the tape, out of curiosity. It started out normally, but then I noticed something strange. During the I Love You song, when the camera panned across all of his kids, there was a moment where it lingered on my face. I looked terrified, and then Barney came over and put his hand on my shoulder, and my expression just went blank, almost trance-like. Totally different from how I remembered feeling. "Mom, do you remember that part?" I asked, rewinding the tape. She barely glanced up from folding laundry. "Yeah, you were probably just tired from all the excitement." But I knew it wasn't that. In fact, I didn't even remember that specific moment of filming. As years passed, I convinced myself that she was right and that those weird business people were probably just having a meeting and my 6-year-old imagination had twisted it into something sinister. The VHS tape of my episode got lost during a move when I was in middle school. And honestly, I was kind of relieved. By high school, the whole experience was just a weird childhood memory I'd occasionally mention at parties. "Yeah, I was on Barney once, no big deal." What I didn't tell people was how I still sometimes woke up with that name echoing in my head. Malgathus. Along with Barney slowly hovering towards me, just above the floor, with an enormous gaping smile. I'd almost completely buried the memory until a few years ago, when I found myself in a YouTube rabbit hole one night. For nostalgia's sake, I decided to look up my old Barney episode. After an hour of searching, I couldn't find it. Weird, but not that weird, so I checked some Barney fan forums and episode guides. According to every official source, the episode I appeared in never existed. Extremely curious at this point, I even contacted PBS directly, explaining that I wanted to find a copy of my episode. Their response was oddly fearful, and they said that they had no record of an episode matching my description from that time period. I gave them my contact info and told them to call me if they found anything. Then they pretty much just hung up. One night a few weeks later, I decided to do something I'd never tried before. I started doing research on Malgathus. Only a handful of results came up, and even those were in very specific forums, mostly from obscure mythology and academic papers, pre-Sumerian deities. One thread caught my eye. It discussed ancient entities that supposedly fed on innocence and wonder, using conduits to cross dimensional barriers. Last year I was in Dallas for a friend's wedding and decided to drive by the old studio. The original building was gone, replaced by a gleaming office complex belonging to a company called Malga Global Entertainment. Their logo? A stylized white dove in flight. Although when I tried to do research about what they did, I couldn't find much. Soon after that, I discovered that there was going to be a new Barney show coming out, and that the press release mentions it using cutting-edge engagement technology to create deeper connections with young viewers. There was a quote from a producer about tapping into the natural receptivity of developing minds. Now, I'm not saying I'm sure there's some ancient entity using children's TV to harvest psychological energy, but I have to wonder, especially after what happened next. I got a call from the PBS station. When I answered, there was essentially someone just breathing into the phone with and began to whisper. "None of them made it. The other kids in your episode, they all went insane. The company's after you. They want to know why you're different. You must hide." Then the phone just hung up. I'm just hoping it was some kind of prank call. But one thing I know for sure is there is a lost episode of the show where very strange things happened behind the scenes. And I don't even know what effect it has had on the world or on me. I keep wondering if one day I'll just snap and be like all those other kids who were on my episode all those years ago. or if these mysterious people will ever find me. In fact, I'm afraid they may already have.